thoughts, if any, about how there's like a survivalist movement in real life now where people think, oh, the zombie apocalypse is going to happen, or some other kind of apocalypse, we need to get
One of
more
the
guns.
one of the great things about apocalypse narratives is they let us play out these survivalist fantasies. And maybe you're this kind of person that I'm going to talk about, and I'm not disparaging this type of person, but one of the reasons why we like to go to horror films is because we like to tell ourselves, I wouldn't do that. I'm not that stupid. I wouldn't open that door. So we kind of like apocalyptic narratives and survival narratives because then we get to watch it and go, I could totally survive this. I could totally handle this. I would know what to do. I would get out of this alive. And so I think there's a combination of that fantasy of kind of superiority that we like to indulge in, and this real world paranoia and fear that things are going to go south and we want to survive. And so the survivalist movement took off in the 50s because that's when we started building fallout shelters and we wanted to survive nuclear winters and all that kind of stuff went on. And then it kind of went away, and then since 9/11 it's come back. And so now there are these preppers. You have preppers who are ready for the comet, or they're ready for the solar flare, or they're ready for the pandemic. But it's got to be a lot more communicable than you go on. But they're ready, right? And on some level, if you're going to commit yourself to that, you're kind of hoping it's going to happen. Because otherwise, what the hell are you doing? But it's like insurance. Insurance is the thing that I hate most about being a grown-up. I am paying money in the hopes that I die, that I get sick. I want to get sick. I mean, it really is weird. I have a neighbor, and he showed me his house. He has 2,000 pounds of wheat stored up. He has a 5,000-gallon tank of water buried in his yard. And he has enough firearms that everyone in this room could have 3 of them. And he is ready. And I asked him, I said, what's all this stuff for? And he's like, it's for when they come. And I figured at that point it was probably better not to ask who they were. Because I'm pretty sure he meant Democrats. And I just didn't want to really get shot. So we talked about it a little bit, and then I left. But the survivalist movement is really big in Utah, and it's really big in rural Western America, and I'm in both. So we've got it. And I think it is this kind of fantasy of superiority. It's this Darwinistic ideal that I'm the fittest. You will all rue the day when you mocked me and laughed at me. I mean, the best movie about this is really Tremors. The survivalists in Tremors are really the best survivalists ever depicted on film. And there are really people like that. Now, there are a number of people who really believe the zombie apocalypse is going to happen. I am less, I think it's less likely. But you know, if it's something like a disease or a virus or a mutation, it's possible. But when everyone asks me, what would you do in a zombie apocalypse? How would you survive? And I said, well, if it was a real zombie apocalypse, I'd find the nearest zombie and I'd go give him a hug. Because I'm out. I don't want to. Have you seen these movies? Did you watch The Walking Dead on Sunday? I don't want to live in that world. I'll join the other team. I'm out.
I don't watch a lot of these movies, but I find the greatest horror is the story about the person who won't go to New York. I mean, that is really a killer. That is terrifying. And of course, reality is always more frightening than fantasy. And that's sort of the Freudian question. So I'm wondering whether you're thinking that the woman who won't go to New York, us as a society, who we are, as opposed to what we watch, is the problem that she isn't watching enough zombie films, or she's watching too little zombie films? In other words, is it supposed to be the return of the repressed, that you then actually can deal with things better because you have worked through the repressed, which would be the Freudian theory? Or is it something sick about our society, and the same people who watch these movies are the people who are in fact crazy, because she's crazy?
Yeah, I would say, this is the Greek theory and this is the Freud. Those of you who play violent video games, who watch horror films, you are more psychologically prepared to handle a crisis. That you've already on some level played out these scenarios in your mind, and so when you are confronted with a certain survivalist scenario, you know what to do. You're prepared. You don't go through a moment of shock because it's not unfamiliar. You would encounter something familiar. Now, this is true. When in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and in the aftermath of 9/11, numerous survivors commented that it was like a movie. Kim Paffenroth, who is one of the, he predates me as a zombie scholar. He wrote the Zombie Encyclopedia 1 and 2. He interviewed some people about 9/11, and he had a student that was in New York at the time, and he said the reason he didn't panic and freak out is because he had seen so many horror movies. So on some level, he was psychologically ready to deal with a crisis of that magnitude. Now, obviously not exactly, but he had some conditioning. Now, my admin doesn't watch any horror movies. She's not interested in anything scary or anything violent or anything horrific. But she lives her life a little bit afraid of stuff, afraid of getting sick, afraid of somebody breaking into the department. And I think it's because she hasn't had the catharsis. She hasn't exposed herself to those emotions. So what she's really afraid of, we could say, is not the event, but how she would react to the event, or her inability to be able to react to the event that terrifies her. And so the Greeks would say, and literary study people, and myself as an English department chair, I would say, this is why you're supposed to read lots of books. This is why you're not supposed to read the same book over and over again. You're supposed to have other vicarious experiences so you can have a spectrum of life experiences which better prepare you for any situation that may surprise you or may not surprise you. So you're ready. It's all up here in the brain, and it's how art can help us get there safely. Because that's the goal of art. Art is safe. It's supposed to be safe. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
What do you think of like the commentary on humanity and like recent zombie stuff, like with like The Walking Dead, is more about like how good you are, like once you've survived, is not like as much about the zombies killing you anymore?
Yeah, zombie narratives become really great petri dishes to explore ethics. Because it's like, what choices will you make? What choices are you ready to make? And what's really important? I've been working on an argument. I'm supposed to co-write a paper with one of the psychology professors, and we can never find time. But what The Walking Dead says more than anything is that if you're a nice person, you're not going to make it. The only way to survive monsters is to become one. And there's lots of stuff tied up in this with Stockholm Syndrome, and there's lots of horror films that explore this with The Final Girl, the idea of the only way to really fight that is to become that. And so The Walking Dead has developed it really interestingly, and it makes it kind of challenging as a viewer because you're rooting for Rick and his group to fight the monsters of the walkers, and they're supposed to fight the monsters of the governor, and they're supposed to fight the monsters at Terminus. But how do they do it? By being monsters. The most monstrous people in that show are sometimes the good guys. So you have to kind of ask yourself, what would you do to survive? And I think, again, that's a good cathartic scenario where you can kind of play out this idea. Because, I live in a pretty high-end gun culture. You probably saw the story about Utah State University. Maybe you didn't, but Anita Sarkeesian wouldn't come speak in Utah because we have very, ironically, very liberal gun laws. And I've thought about it sometimes because I work at an institution that could have a shooting. And I thought, should I have a gun on campus? Should I have a gun in campus? And I realized, if a student came in, if a student was really upset or mentally disturbed or just really upset, and he came in and wanted to shoot me, I would rather he shoot me than I shoot him. Because I'm not willing to do that. Now, if I'm in my classroom and a student tries to shoot one of my students, I might be able to shoot him. And so, through the catharsis of these narratives, you start to play out these scenarios that hopefully will never happen to you. But they help prepare you for those, and they help you ask these tough questions. Because what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be humane? What is humanity? Well, generally speaking, in apocalyptic narratives and zombie narratives, you don't see a lot of the humanity. You see the death of the humanity, the sacrifice of the humanity for something else, greed or lust or desire or selfishness. So it'll be interesting for those of you who do watch The Walking Dead to see how Gabriel plays out, the preacher character who is the one who's not willing necessarily to kill, to survive. So So I think these are good questions. I think they're tough questions that we should ask. Yeah.
To piggyback on what you're talking about right now, what do you then feel about how a movie such as like Warm Bodies takes, you know, love and humanity is what will then bring back zombies?
I have a big problem with it. One of my book chapters is actually a rather critical evisceration of Warm Bodies. I don't necessarily hate it as a movie, but the problem I see with a film like Warm Bodies, like The Twilight before it, and in many ways like Romeo and Juliet initially, is the message of Warm Bodies is, hey, your boyfriend's abusive, just love him. Just love him more and he'll stop. You know, you're dating a monster, it's because you don't love him enough. And so this idea that love conquers all, and all you have to do is love somebody, I find that problematic and potentially dangerous. Because too much of a buy-in to this idea of the power of love, to quote Ulysses, is that you can blind yourself to the dangers that may actually be around you. Now, that's not every scenario. There are some cases where just loving someone and supporting them and standing by them will help and will maybe bring them back from the brink. But if you are putting yourself in harm's way, it's not worth it. It's not the right path. And so I think this idea that zombies can be healed through love is a little silly, but it's a nice romantic idea, I suppose. But it's buried in some very dangerous rhetoric about abusive relationships. That's how I read it. Yeah, up here.
So you told us perhaps why zombies in essence are uncanny, that they're familiar, unfamiliar, animate, inanimate, dead, alive. But could you speak a little bit maybe to the common behaviors that zombies exhibit within these productions about cannibalism?
Yeah, it's taboos, right?
Yeah.
It's such a there's, on the one hand, the big thing is the loss of agency. And so to me, I'm surprised no one's asked, because usually people ask how I define a zombie. And to me, I don't care if they're dead or alive. I don't care if they're fast or slow. I don't care if they just eat brains or they eat everything. If you go back to the Haitian tradition, the original source of the zombie is defined by a lack of consciousness, a lack of agency. And so to me, that's the first really line of uncanny behavior. They're operating on these auto functions, like lower brainstem stuff. They walk, they attack, they eat, very lower order thinking, devoid of all the upper conscious abilities that we come to associate with humanity. So that in of itself is very, very uncanny. You're a human, but you're acting like an animal. But of course, what is it we repress? We're all animals. That's the whole ego in the id, right? The thing is, we think we're the ego, but just under that surface, we're the id. And so then you get into the cannibalism taboo, which has been quite deftly addressed in Walking Dead, especially Sunday. No spoilers, but this idea that cannibalism is a huge taboo in our culture. You don't eat dead humans, that's awful. But why not? They're dead. Wouldn't it be a better way? Because there are cultures that say, no, you infuse the spirit of your loved ones back into your body. You take their genetic material and you make it your own. You recycle that. Wouldn't it be better for you to eat mom than the worms and the bugs? Now, you're all going, yeah, this is bizarre. Yeah, that's uncanny. Because we've been taught cannibalism is bad. But you know why we think it's so bad? Because we all used to do it. Thousands of years ago. We probably all have that in our brains. I have a Maori colleague, and he reminds me regularly that he's only 5 generations off of cannibalism. And then I give him the day off. But that's another behavior. It's familiar, it's unfamiliar, but it's uncanny because it's actually familiar. It's its closeness to us that upsets us the most. The fact that we have something like the soccer team that crashes in the Andes and then they end up eating each other to survive. And then again, the ethics thing, right? If you were starving to death and you had a dead human you could eat, would you? Or would you die? Would you starve to death rather than eat a human being? That's the question of terminus. That's why that group is so fascinating, and I wish they would have dedicated a couple of episodes just to those guys in The Walking Dead. I think that's fascinating. But yeah, I mean, it's down to the simple movements of the zombie. You look like a human, but you're acting weird. I mean, it manifests on different levels depending on how the monster is depicted and what subject matter the narrative is targeting. Because zombies are so multifarious, you can make a zombie narrative as a criticism of anything you want. Because people do it all the time. Romero's done 6 different versions. Anyway, we're about out of time.
Yeah, why don't we continue the discussion up at Delta? So thank you everyone for coming. 10 a.m. tomorrow if you want to go to the seminar. We have an exciting year of programs ahead for Freudian 6, the talk series.